Здравствуйте, Василий Алексеевич.
Hello. This is your
Первое
first
ваше
interview
интервью
in the
в
new
новом
year.
году.
Let me
Разрешите
congratulate you on
поздравить
all the
вас со
holidays,
всеми
but, of
праздниками,
course,
но, безусловно,
likewise. Thank
спасибо.
you. Of
Я
course,
должен,
I
конечно,
should start
начать
with the
с
results of the
итогов
outgoing
уходящего
year.
года. А,
What does
Каким
the outgoing year
видится
look like
уходящий
from
год
here, from
отсюда
the
из
Russian permanent mission to the
российского
United
госпредства при
Nations?
Организации Объединенных Наций?
And can
И
we
можно
say
ли
that in the
сказать,
outgoing
что
year, we were
в
all on the
уходящем году
edge
мы
and
все
only miraculously
были
did not
на
slip?
краю и лишь чудом не соскользнули?
Or
Или
it's
это
not a
не чудо, это
miracle, it's
плод,
the
в
fruit
том
of your
числе и ваших
diplomatic efforts as
дипломатических усилий?
well? As it is sung there, I'll water the horses, I'll finish the verse, I'll stand on the edge a little more. Well, I think it would probably be an exaggeration to say that we were standing on the edge. Although our Western former partners believe that they are allegedly not participating in the conflict, allegedly having nothing to do with it, and standing on the sidelines, they provide themselves with guaranteed security, believing that they do not cross red lines which they drew themselves. But it is quite possible that we have other red lines which they do not suspect, and therefore, of course, their direct complicity in the Ukrainian conflict is the situation in which our leadership has repeatedly sent signals to Western partners to come to their senses and be, the Russian nuclear doctrine has been updated, which still remains defensive, but it has important nuances that I hope have been carefully read in the West. But a demonstration of the capabilities of Hazel. This is one of those confirmations that we seriously intend to protect our security with the means available to us. This is certainly the case. But there were also positive moments, namely, the further strengthening of multipolarity, the rise of the voice of the global South, which is increasingly demanding its place under the sun, a well-deserved place under the sun of world politics. The historic BRICS summit took place, which is undoubtedly one of the poles of the multipolar world. A resolution was adopted on our active initiative on colonialism in all its manifestations. It was adopted by an overwhelming majority of votes, no one voted against. Gritting their teeth and grudgingly the Western countries had to abstain. But it is obvious that the resolution was addressed primarily to them. But the year was multifaceted, like any year we spend at the United Nations. There have never been boring, insipid years here, at least in my memory. Well, the year also brought changes in the political landscape in the United States itself. In recent weeks, there has been increased talk about the possibility of filling the possible negotiation process on Ukraine with some kind of meaning. I want to say that in this regard, the word transaction is increasingly being used. This is our understanding of what should be present in this deal and what exactly should not be there, if we are talking about it hypothetically at all, and how it generally agrees with our strategic goals, but also with the goals of a special military operation. But the deal, this is generally a favorite word of Trump, everyone knows. How this is consistent is still unclear. These are some kind of unformulated, unclear signals about readiness for something. Often we hear the word conflict freezing. President Putin, for the last time on December 19th, said clearly what conditions we are ready to talk about. Not to freeze, but to end this conflict, provided that our laws and security interests are respected. But so far, nothing that goes in the signals of the new American administration indicates that this is something that will be more interesting to us. We also hear conversations from the Ukrainian side, which has recently suddenly begun to send signals about certain agreements. What is meant by this is unknown, and it is also impossible to take it seriously. The question is that when Zelensky finally, let's say, takes the time to want to sit down at the negotiating table, on which line of combat contact this will happen. The further, the worse the conditions will be for him. He has been told about this for a long time. The question is up to him. As for the proposal of the American administration, we have not seen anything formalized. Let's see what they offer. But to be honest, I have my doubts that it will be something that we will be interested in. Well, everything is clear with the old administration. 2 days before the new year, Biden rolled out another package of military aid to Ukraine for $2.5 billion. Such an arc is formed by instability, but it is obvious even in the contours of the maiden absolute history in Georgia. Very strange elections in Romania, exacerbations in the Middle East, where there has not yet been an aggravation for this month, maybe a month and a half, which took place after the elections in the United States. In this regard, the following question arises. Is it deliberately set on fire? It's being set on fire to ruin Trump's life. This is being set on fire to take revenge on us for our successes in Ukraine. Or we are witnessing the departure of a whole huge political group from the scene. They are called differently. They can be called globalists there. Well, in general, such a large generation in American foreign policy is leaving. And is it leaving for a sense of its own bankruptcy or not? The globalists haven't gone anywhere, they just lay low. They have not changed their beliefs, they may now be playing cards in a slightly different way, taking into account the peculiarities of Trump's approaches, which will also not be deprived of the influence of a globalist. Because Trump is not alone. We remember what happened in the previous cadence, when he tried to do something, and was stopped by his own political class, in what he could sincerely strive to accomplish, but he was simply not allowed to do it. This political engineering, it is really characteristic of the globalist community, and we, by the way, in general, in principle, are evidence of a collision of globalist capitalism with the capitalism of financial capitalism, first of all, the capitalism of industry. In fact, this is one of the aspects of today's conflicts. With regard to what the outgoing administration is trying to do, of course, it is trying to do everything that it can do before January 20th and break all the dishes that have not yet been broken in the kitchen. As for the trenches of Ukraine, 100,000 munitions were announced for delivery today. But what is the supply of American weapons? After all, those trenches that are allocated to Ukraine, and they are mostly settled by the United States. Ukraine is being decommissioned, and the American military-industrial complex is being re-equipped. As for the events in various countries of the world, starting from Romania, Georgia, ending with Syria, but they all have a slightly different genesis. But the elections are in Romania. It's really miracles of political equilibrism, when they took away the victory of an undesirable candidate just from the pen. I just didn't like it. I didn't like it, and that's it. I will not like the elections in Georgia, and Georgia has the Georgian authorities have managed to oppose themselves to this essentially maiden crowd, which was inspired from the outside, and I hope that everyone will calm down there. And the Georgian authorities will pursue a policy that meets the interests of the Georgian people, and the interests of globalists who are trying to manipulate the situation of Georgia in many other countries. Syria has a slightly different genesis, it can be a separate topic. Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. If we take the reaction to the well-known events here in the United States, then, of course, it was so malicious towards us. But now there is literally a statement by the leader of the actual Syrian authorities, who says that Moscow and Damascus are linked by strategic interests. And he would not want, and these current authorities would not want Russia to leave. How seriously should these words be taken? How responsible are those who utter these words, and what prospects do we really have in Syria? Well, even from the point of view of preserving military facilities that are important to us. You know that the organization headed by the current de facto head of Syria is listed by the Security Council of Oirashan, and the de facto authorities want sanctions to be lifted from them, and represent themselves as a power that cares about the interests of all Syrians.
властью, которая заботится об интересах всех сирийцев,
I
я
have
должен
to
признать,
admit that today they
что на
behave quite
сегодняшний день
competently. I
они
don't know
ведут
from a
себя
hint or being themselves,
достаточно
realizing
грамотно.
themselves,
Не знаю,
that
это
it is
подсказки
necessary to
или
send the right signals
будучи
to the
сами,
entire Syrian society.
понимая сами, что необходимо посылать правильные сигналы всему сирийскому обществу.
Russia and
Россия с
Syria
Сирией
have
связывают
long-standing
давние
ties of friendship.
узы дружбы,
They are not
не
connected
связаны с
with any
конкретными
regimes.
режимами.
The
Нынешний
current de facto leader
руководитель
of
Сирии
Syria is sending
посылает
signals,
сигналы, в том числе
including in the
контексте
context of the Russian presence
российского
in
присутствия
Syria,
в Сирии,
saying
говоря о
that
том,
the
что
Syrian authorities,
сирийские
the new
новые
Syrian
сирийские
authorities, are
власти
interested in
заинтересованы в
continuing our
продолжении
presence.
нашего присутствия.
But
Но
again,
опять
I
до
understand it has not
конкретики
come
пока,
to
я так понимаю,
specifics
дело
yet.
не дошло.
Vasily
Василий Алексеевич,
Alexeyevich, I
я
can't
не
help
могу не
but ask
спросить
you about
вас
new possible
по
foci.
поводу новых возможных
Trump
очагов.
is known for his
Трамп
such vivid
известен
statements,
своими
he
такими
has
яркими
already begun to
заявлениями,
make
уже
them,
начал их делать,
and even
даже
outlined
обозначил
such points
такие
that we should
точки,
probably
на
pay
которые нам
attention to.
следует
There's
обращать внимание,
Greenland,
там,
and
Гренландия,
Panama, and
Панама,
Canada.
Канада.
How
Сколько
serious is
всего
this?
На Амазоне
Can I
можно
see it on Amazon?
можно
You
посмотреть
can
на
view it on
Амазоне,
Amazon if you
если
have a
есть
premium
премиум
account.
аккаунт.
I
Я
advise all
советую
my
всем своим
colleagues
коллегам
to stock up on
вовремя запастись
popcorn and watch what
попкорном и
happens
наблюдать,
after
что
January
происходит
20th.
20 января.
I
Я
think a
думаю,
lot
что
of
это и вам
interesting things
интересно.
are waiting for us,
А своим
and I
коллегам,
advise my
будущим коллегам
colleagues,
ФСБ,
future FS colleagues
Панаме и
Panama and
Дании
Denmark,
советую
to
готовиться
prepare
к
for
заседаниям
Security
Совета
Council
Безопасности
meetings on these
Совета
issues.
Безопасности.
But
Но
jokes are
шутки
jokes,
шутками, а
and
действительно
indeed many are now
многие
guessing,
сейчас гадают,
speculating
спекулируют по
about
поводу
what the
того, какова
policy of
будет
the new
политика новой
administration will be
администрации
in
по
relation to
отношению ко
everything.
всему.
While
Пока они
they
себя
do
не
not give
выдают,
themselves away,
потому что
because the school
школа
of thought
мысли
is sometimes
подчас
diametrically
диаметрально
opposed.
противоположна. Кто-то
Someone
говорит, что
says that it will be
будет
even worse
для
for
тех
those
стран,
countries that are the
которые
target.
являются целью, это будет еще хуже.
And
А кто-то
someone
говорит,
says
что
that Trump is so
Трамп
transactional,
настолько
loves
transactional,
transactions so much,
transactional,
loves
так любит сделки,
transactions
что,
so
может
much,
быть,
that
он
maybe he
найдет
will
способ,
find a way to solve some
как
issues
за
through
счет
transactions
сделок
that, it
решить
would
какие-то
seem,
вопросы,
he is
которые,
not able to
казалось
solve
бы,
for ideological
он
reasons.
из идеологических соображений не способен решить.
Vasily Alexeyevich, about prospects. The year has come, an important year in the history of the United Nations of the 80s. What are we preparing? What can we expect next year? And to what extent are fundamental changes in the work of the impossible at all? I think that the main Y anniversary of this year,
Главный юбилей этого года
this is not even the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, but the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Soviet people in the Great Patriotic War, thanks to which the organization was created. In other words, it is secondary to that victory. Anniversary of the organization. This is certainly an occasion to look back and look into the future. Naturally, the main thing is that everyone who thinks about the UN is in their thoughts. This is a reform of the Security Council, but with the reform of the Security Council, this is a very complex process. You can't fit it under the anniversary, and it's impossible to fit it. This is a very painstaking job. Soon, in January, the next season of intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform will begin. We will agree there on what can be agreed, but this cannot be done, as they say, by letter, that is, in part. This should be a package of agreements that the majority of member countries will agree to. There are many reform proposals, some of them, including those coming from a number of member countries, are quite naive and impractical. There are countries that claim a seat on the Security Council that will never get, and we have already said this directly. In particular, Germany and Japan will not see a permanent seat on the Security Council, not only as their ears, but also everything else. This is already an obvious fact. And much more. There are as many as 5 clusters, and all these 5 clusters are interconnected, and it is impossible to agree on one without agreeing on the other. We need to know the end result of the game before saying that we are moving on to negotiations based on some text. There can be no reform that will not be supported by the majority of the member states. It will not be viable, and then it still needs to be ratified by all 5 permanent members of the Council. Thank you very much. Thank you.